Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Talking Feds Live Q&A for January. We had a bunch of questions submitted, including by some of you who have joined. But as always, feel free to drop any questions in the chat if they come up while we're chatting, and I'll make sure to pass them along to Harry. So, Harry, are you ready for the first one?
I am. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. I always really enjoy these things.
Yeah. Okay, so the first one, there are kind of two questions that play to the same thing, so I'm going to ask them both together. But do you have any idea who DOJ has interviewed and or subpoenaed lately for the January 6th insurrection investigation? And the second question is, do you have any indication that the people who are at the Willard hotel room have been subpoenaed or interviewed, and would we know? So general questions about how that investigation is done.
So just in general, how would we know? I know that there are people who have jaundiced views on both sides and think that the DOJ or at least the FBI leak. But in my experience, really, the way we find out these things is because people who have appeared in front of the grand jury or their lawyers let it drop. And which they're perfectly entitled to do, by the way. They're not bound by this Rule 6, which is a thing that tells assistant U.S. attorneys and their agents that they can't divulge anything from a grand jury. So the short answer is we wouldn't necessarily know unless we do. And, of course, an important distinction here is in many cases, DOJ will first interview witnesses with an FBI agent, and they'll produce a memorandum, and they want to be really very sure what they're going to say before they stick them in the grand jury. Okay, all that said, so first, the Willard War Room. We do know that, of course, that Giuliani, who was a big figure in the Willard War Room, testified in Georgia. We do know that Stone, who has some role, testified in Georgia. We do know that Sidney Powell, also in that room, Jenna Ellis, were called again to Georgia. We don't know specifically, I think, that they were called to DOJ, and just in general, there's a number of indications, and that might be one of them, that they're really at a pretty preliminary stage and haven't locked in people's testimony in the grand jury for the January 6th whole cluster of crimes, especially the phony electors. So, I could and should look it up, because it's very possible that we've gotten concrete reports about one or more, but I think I would remember. And, of course, we do know, but this is, that Cipollone and Pat Philbin, very important witnesses. But everyone you're talking about in the Willard War Room, they would be antagonistic witnesses. They might have Fifth Amendment rights. They might even be targets, and then you wouldn't bring them in. Anyway, not that I recall specifically with respect to January 6th, but I could be wrong. In other words, but if we know, it would just have been through standard news reports that come from the side of the witnesses who have appeared.
All right. We have another January 6th related question. You mentioned in the last podcast that some of the 4 charges against Donald Trump referred by the January 6th committee would have a venue required in Florida. Which ones and why is that?
Gotcha. So venue, it's where you can have jurisdiction, the federal government does, and venue is a rule that says, it expresses a preference, but by and large it means where most or all of the activity takes place. That's where something would be venued. Sometimes there's more than one possible venue, and of course the whole backdrop to this question is everybody knows that Florida has a worse jury pool by far than District of Columbia, and then there's certain procedural advantages. So basically, if they could be in DC, they'd like to. So which are the ones of the 4 that were introduced? So basically, when everything he took, maybe things that he put in safes, etc., there could be venued in DC. But the biggest charge against him, probably the one that is both easiest to prove and really is most obnoxious, you could say, or really contemptuous, really Trumpy, it has to do with obstruction. And so his conduct there, and even the requests, the search, they happen in Florida. So when there's the lie in the subpoena, when there's the search itself, when there's all the negotiations back and forth, they're in Florida. And for that reason, it's possible that an attempt to bring it in DC would be met with a successful change of venue motion that would really upset the apple cart, especially because everybody assumes conviction, unanimous, beyond a reasonable doubt, is win for the Department of Justice. Anything else is lost, meaning a holdout jury. This is figuring also in the Fulton County case, where Georgia juries can be tough, but the federal juries, and there's a chance if we get into that you could have a federal jury there, could be really tough. It's a different jury pool. So, what are the odds that there's one kind of MAGA loving, crazy person in Florida who just can't be persuaded? And what are the consequences? The odds are way greater than DC, and the consequences are severe, with in the adage that applies to all these actions: don't shoot at the king unless you can kill.
All right. The next question is from Jay, who's here with us. In a previous podcast, there was a discussion of mental states for an accused individual, temporary insanity, incompetence, etc. I find this confusing. Can you cover it in more detail?
Sure. And I'm sorry of course that was by a sidebar reader. Yeah. But essentially, insanity, including temporary insanity, is a defense against a crime. You were insane at the time you committed it. You are not guilty by reason of insanity. As a result, Hinckley's a very good example. Maybe you go to an institution for insane people, but you are not guilty. Same as if they didn't prove it, or you had an alibi or whatever. So it is an actual defense to the charges. Now, it's a very controversial defense. You can imagine people, especially in high-profile crimes, people get up in arms when it's successfully pleaded. Nevertheless, any evolved justice system would say that you can't put somebody in jail for things for which they were insane. But what does it mean, insane? There are a couple big tests that are out there, and one is hard. There's the Monocton rule and the Model Penal Code rule, but basically, is it enough that you were kind of, totally confused and out of it, or did you have to be so suffering from a mental defect that you were unable to know the difference between right and wrong? And those are but whatever jurisdiction will have one or other of those tests. If you prove it, and it usually falls to you, or can constitutionally, to prove by a preponderance, you walk, except you walk usually to the institution across the street, but you are not guilty. Competency is a due process issue, and it has to do with how you are at that moment in front of the court, because the constitutional principle here is it's not fair, and it's just a violation of basic justice principles to have someone who is, we'll say, crazy in shorthand now, and I'll get back to that in a moment, actually tried and put in jail. It's essential that the defendant understand the charges against her and be in a position to participate in the defense. So if you are incompetent, and that I say, so insanity will be a battle of the experts. The defense will proffer someone who came in and said they meet that standard, whatever it is. The government may have someone who says, no, they were fine. Here's my opinion. Competency, similarly, a psychiatrist comes in, examines the defendant, and says, right now, and incompetency is a lower standard, or I guess you could say higher. So, diseased and ill as to be unable almost to appreciate that a trial is going on. And you're just not capable of knowing what's happening and participating in your own defense. Now, the big point here, like contempt we've heard about, if you're not capable, you can't be tried. But if you become capable, for instance, through medication, which a court can order, and you're then able to appreciate, and the psychiatrist comes in and says, I've looked at her or him a second time, and they can appreciate the charges, now they're competent, now they go forward. So insanity, a defense to the crime; competence, a defense or a reason not to permit the crime to go on, the trial to happen, at least temporarily. Did that make it clear enough, Jay?
Yeah.
Well, you're
Thumbs
shaking
up.
your head, Olivia, but you didn't ask the question. Oh, we got a thumbs
from
up
Jay.
on it?
Yeah, we have
All right,
thumbs up
thank
from
you,
Jay.
Jay. All right, okay.
Alrighty. Next question. What should we watch for in the wrongful death civil suit brought by Brian Sicknick's estate?
It's a tough one. It's one thing about the people who actually attacked the partner, or Brian Sidnick, his partner has brought the lawsuit. Trump says some things, says some incendiary things. We should watch for two things. First Amendment defenses. It's one thing to do a blow that hits the ceiling and then hits the dog who rushes and bites the head off. That kind of physical concatenation it's not constitutionally problematic to punish. But if we're talking about speech, there's going to be a series of defenses by Trump. And in addition, in Sicknick's case, there's an unfortunate for him ruling that's hard to understand, and people don't understand it that well. He dies the next day, I believe, and has a series of strokes, and yet a medical examiner rules that the actual attack is not the proximate cause. It's the strokes. But of course, he had the strokes because of the attack. But that break in the chain of causation is going to make it much harder to tag Trump again directly. So look for A, First Amendment defenses, and B, defenses based on causation. They will be done before a trial starts. Trump will say, dismiss me. I want out of this lawsuit because either of these things apply. And if I think his chances are pretty decent for getting out of this one. Then, by the way, there's the whole, I don't think we have to watch it for so much before it's beginning to be resolved. But in all these things, including the Eugene Carroll case, he's saying, I was president and I was acting in my role as president. And if that were so, the Department of Justice would come in and defend him. He'd be effectively off the hook. That's the third thing. But I think in Sidnick in particular, First Amendment defenses, and especially this causation thing because of the ruling that the death the next day was not quite caused by, sort of caused by, fill in the blank, the actual attack, and that'll make it much harder to hold Trump himself liable. Let me just say quickly, I've been on TV recently. I made a big point about these civil lawsuits being a pretty important part of the overall, series of threats coming at Trump. This is, I think, of all of them, probably the weakest one.
Okay, good to know. How should the media properly report the Joe Biden documents case? And I know this is something that you've talked about quite a bit in the last week or so.
Talked about, and when I'm not talking about it, torn my hair out. Because, look, of course, those documents shouldn't have ended up where they were. Something we don't know, we're trying to find out. In fact, I ask everyone with knowledge of this is, how hard or easy is that to happen in the first place? As best we can tell, it happens a lot. But assuming it happens, somewhat, that it's like possible to do inadvertently, it's a nothing burger as a criminal case. We now have a special counsel, in place, and this really unfortunate Washington dynamic, which is it starts with some overlap. Even then, right away out of the gate, Republicans were saying, double standard, exactly the same, ridiculous things. They were of course very different. You have in one case all kinds of conduct that's likely criminal and likely will be charged. And in the other case with Biden, not only absence of criminal conduct, best I can tell and best we know, absence of any conduct whatsoever. Some staffer went in, or it looks like it was a lawyer now, which is an interesting point, and is packing up somebody packed it up in 2008. Now somebody's moving it. Neither of those guys is Joe Biden. So even though if there is, and there is, a legitimate policy question about, well, do we need to tighten up the controls? Why does this seem to happen a lot? It's something that has nothing to do with Biden. So I think just like, I was on a show a couple of days ago and somebody just said it really well and succinctly. And I just thought like that 10 seconds ought to be required before every single discussion, because there's this feel that like, oh, it started like it could be bad. And now since we've had problems, what are the nature of the problems? That the DOJ has blundered, or Biden's lawyers, or the FBI. There's a story today, there was this, what the media loves to call the drip. It has come out in 3 different productions by the Biden folks. This is an important point to understand as well. When scandals like this or situations with any kind of criminal overtones happen, what we think of as a one government becomes not one government. You have at a minimum 3 different entities: the FBI, the DOJ, the White House, and Biden's personal lawyers. And there really are cross-cutting considerations. On the one hand, if you're just doing communications, look at everything, get it all out, etc. On the other, it's a criminal case, and if you say things, or if you think it's finished but then it isn't, you're going to maybe get crosswise with the special counsel. All this little detour is just by way of saying that kind of inadvertence. You can imagine how it happens. But what's driving me, insane is the kind of feeling. There was a poll today, predictably, 60% of Republicans felt that Biden's conduct is more serious than Trump's. And even a lot of Democrats who didn't think that thought, needs to be investigated. So because of media coverage and just the kind of unfortunate circumstances, it feels to me like it's playing like, this is about a third of the Trump thing. And it's a total zero of the Trump thing. There's just no suggestion of any crime at all on Biden's part, and the only way there's a legitimate policy, well, there are important questions. How did it get out, and why? There are some important questions. Got nothing to do with Biden, and they don't ground any kind of scandal, and they shouldn't be used that way, but they are, and inevitably, especially because you have now the new McCarthy House crowd screaming at every turn. Why wasn't there an FBI search here? Well, maybe because there wasn't the showing before a magistrate of probable cause to believe a crime had happened. This is really completely different situations that just because of the overlap of the, documents were taken out. They shouldn't have been. We should understand. And then these, what you could call self-inflicted wounds from the White House, but even those, it's more tricky than people understand. That the combination of those things has made it a 2 comparable events in the media coverage, and they are just not comparable, and people should understand that. So I think the media has been, D or C minus on this one.
Yeah. All right. And a related question. I'm curious about the special counsel selection process. Presumably, they just compile a short list, but are several people interviewed, or do they just start with the top candidate and work down the line?
It's a great question, really great, and people are starting to look at it, because there are people who are saying, all right, he has to appoint a special counsel. Does he really have to appoint a movement conservative, like her? And the truth is, there is no selection process. I mean, there's nothing routine, because we still think of it as unusual. And in fact, sometimes they're nothing. We know that Merrick Garland never met Jack Smith, including after he appointed him. It's kind of like, so, and as best we can tell, so he was the U.S. Attorney in Maryland, so maybe they're in the same kinds of circles. But the big decision is made. Fine, we'll do a special counsel. In the case of Smith, his deputy, his deputy's main staffer happened to know. So Lisa Monaco's main staffer worked with Smith 4 years before, and they served it up. They're trying to keep it all under wraps. They're really worried about credibility and how it'll play. And there's no process. I think probably her never interviewed either. And there's a lot of criticism or concern coming out. I mean, look, Department of Justice rules dictate the diatribe I just launched. If I'm right about that, and there's nothing different, Department of Justice principles require a quick exoneration of Joseph Biden, because he is someone who's been put under public scrutiny of criminal conduct unfairly, and that's a requirement. But here comes Robert Hur, who is a movement conservative, B, has to pick his staff and his office space and get up and running, C, will probably interview all kinds of people because he's supposed to get to the bottom of it. So that means the staffers and, the maintenance and everybody, and end up with a interview of Biden, which I think Biden will sit for, but that'll be negotiated out. We're talking months, during which the pall over Biden's, remains, which is not only unfair because he's, there's not the slightest suggestion he's done anything wrong, but also it's a political disaster is maybe too strong, but it's a complete distraction from things that he does, including very good things he does. So you have, good inflation news, and he comes out and says, Mr. President, why'd you do the doc? And you have the almost Hollywood scene of scandal at the White House. And that's going to continue, and that's the thing that people absorb. Anyway, very long-winded answer. What's the process for picking a special counsel? Ain't no process for picking a special counsel.
That's super interesting. I did not realize that. Here's
Stick
another. Here's another. In the context, this is likely in the context of the new investigations coming from the House. Can DOJ refuse to share info with the House because the topic is under investigation?
100%. And the House knows this, and the law is clear. It's a separation of powers issue. And it's, because it impairs their ability to execute the law. You say things, and that you A, alert possible targets. B, you give a roadmap to where you're going. C, you might very unfairly be outing people because the House leaks like a sieve and everybody knows it. They did it with Rod Rosenstein. He, was under such pressure, and he buckled a couple times and gave them stuff completely improper. And there's law on it, and there's, memoranda, and the Department of Justice will say, no way, we can't do it. The House knows that's what the Department of Justice will say. So it's just a charade so that the House, receiving this rebuff from the Department of Justice, somebody can go on to Fox News and say, what are they hiding? And we need to know. And they told us back then. And, it's axiomatic. Oh, but by the way, you said under investigation. I should be really clear. Under criminal investigation. If they're looking at an overall, policy issue or whatever, it can be shared. And, of course, this is a little wrinkle. If it has to do with national security and intelligence, there is a tradition of keeping certain members in the loop in Congress. Of course, some of those members, the two people from the Intelligence Committee in the House, can't be trusted and they'll leak. So if there's things about that, tell us what you did about Afghanistan and why you made that decision. That's one of the really burning issues of the day that the House Republicans have said they want to investigate. Along with Hunter Biden's laptop and the what was the other sort of old one, withdrawal from Afghan. Oh, the origins of COVID. That's going to be a big one. Okay. Stuff like that could be a little soft, could be a matter of a fight, could be, go ahead, sue us, take it to court. Now, remember, the shoe's now on the other foot, from the recalcitrance of the Trump folks before, because the possession is 9/10 of the law or whatever. DOJ has the stuff. But all the stuff here that's going to matter is pending criminal investigations. DOJ will say no and send these polite letters with 8 paragraphs and make it clear they have no right. And, Jordan or Marjorie Taylor Greene or McCarthy himself will go on Fox News and say, what are they hiding, and use it just as a political club to beat them with. Complete cynical exercise. I'm sorry, I'm kind of long-winded today. The answer to your question is yes. There is the department is totally within its rights to say a pending criminal investigation we are not going to share.
Okay.
And I said it very quickly at the beginning. I'm sorry, Olivia, but just very quick so you understand the reasons. It's not just constitutional separation of powers. It's bad for the people under possible suspicion. It's bad for the government trying to do the case. It's bad in a number of ways. Really, really bad for an investigation. In addition, it's a violation of the separation of powers.
Got it. All right. We have another question from someone who's with us, Matt Glenn.
Hey, Matt.
He says, as I track the January 6th trials and sentencing, it seems that in many cases, the punishment is too harsh or far too light for the crime. As a former prosecutor, how do you look at recommending sentences? And what are your impressions on the sentencing for January 6th convictions to date? And what types of sentences would be appropriate for those yet to be charged? But seemingly at the top of the conspiracy. So people who have maybe DOJ.
It's a really great and perceptive question, because I think everyone knows this. The biggest criminal set of criminal trials and convictions in the history of the Department of Justice. And here's how it works. When that's going to happen, the U.S. attorney from D.C. walks over to the chief judge's office and the Beryl Howe, and they have a discussion. How are we going to handle this? Whatever justice would generally dictate, you're not going to have, this is the chief judge talking, you're not going to have 50 trials that go 6 weeks each and people put it, there was a strong sentiment that this has to be streamlined and tractable. That's one. Then two, the department really methodically has gone up the ladder. I think we're at 900 plus people charged, and they've gone from people deserve to be charged, like they, went on in there and knew they shouldn't have been. But now, we're at seditious conspiracy. And so generally, these guys in particular, you had pressure from, the early on ones, you had pressure from the judges. You just had a huge river of folks, etc. So, and now we're on the most serious. I would say, as a former prosecutor, in a perfect world of Solomonic justice and infinite jail space and a court that has 3 times as many judges as they do, the sentences should have been longer. There are a lot of pretty short sentences, but it's a kind of a good lesson in, how individual principles of justice sometimes give way to systemic pressure. Now, though, they really are. It's interesting. There's about 150 out there still that they haven't found yet. Some of them, I think, are kind of low level. Some are medium level. I don't think they're the highest ones. So if those come back into play. Oh, you also have a problem of horizontal equity, right? The courts are saying, if this guy is getting 2 months. How can that guy? Now, that wouldn't normally be such a problem for bank robbers in this judge's court versus that, but these people were so, obviously doing the same thing. And that kind of notion of horizontal equity, I think, tends to depress sentences rather than increase them. All right, but now we're at seditious, now we're at the really bad customers, and they are pretty big sentences. And so, my view as a prosecutor just has to do with how serious you think their conduct was. Were they sort of slightly crazy and frenetic and out of control, or did they sort of plan to use violence to overthrow or keep the lawfully elected president of the United States from taking office? I think they did the latter. That's some really serious stuff. Even if they're like just nasty kind of crazy guys who had their head turned, that's a really, really serious conduct that, it just cannot be tolerated. So my sense is these sentences, which have been pretty big, 5, 6, 8 years, are justified.
All right. Here's a little shift to your other area of expertise. What paths are available to build a set of enforceable ethics regulations for the behavior of Supreme Court justices? It seems that legislating regulations for their behavior would be a sea change. How can healthy norms be codified?
Another really good question, because it's a kind of ultimate unanswered separation of court. How can they be? Everyone agree. They have been in the case of lower court judges. So, it's really like outrageous. Who the hell are these guys? These are judges. They happen to be at the higher level, but just like, we don't have to pay attention to ethics. All these guys do by virtue of laws that Congress has passed. Okay, so it's a pretty strong argument, especially with some of the messes we've had, that Supreme Court justices, too, ought to be subject in the same way, including subject to censure or even other discipline if they do wrong. And how would that happen? Someday when the government is functioning soundly and there's not the jet sharks dynamic that we have now, where the Republicans say, we want to coddle, they're on the home team. Justices shouldn't be on the home team, but they're on the home team and we're worried about them. Someday when it's sensible, they codify, they basically just say, 28 U.S.C. 455 that applies. We know it applies to all the other judges in the country. Guess what? U9, it also applies to it. But now it goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rationally, irrationally strikes it down. Says violation of separation of powers. Under our system, people take issue with this, but it's pretty fundamental that when there's that kind of dispute, it's not like this, by the way, in England, it's not like this in other places, but if the Supreme Court strikes it down, even though they're concerned about, they're concerned in their own, cause, etc., they strike it down. Again, I think we're at, a stalemate, and they prevail. I wouldn't want to be the clerk charged by my boss with writing the opinion about why it's unconstitutional to apply these to the Supreme Court justices when it's perfectly routine to apply the law to courts of appeals judges. They're kind of big shots, district court judges. But if they do, I think probably they have the drop, as it were. So, short answer, Congress passes something and the Supreme Court doesn't strike it down.
All right, got it. We have a question in the chat from Ed Schneider. In high-profile cases, defenses often use social science researchers to inform jury selection questionnaires and even mock trial arguments. Will DOJ do the same for January 6th trials as we near the big ones?
Great question. So does everyone understand? And it's become a common thing in practice where a lot of money's on the line. I've been in several of these. You actually hire jurors to come in. You watch them through a one-way mirror. It is terrifying. They may or may not talk about anything having to do with the evidence and your actual, maybe they do, maybe they don't, etc. But you do that. And you have jury consultants who are, it's a funny thing, our commitment to, we want to think of jurors as fungible, but everybody knows they aren't. Everyone knows they even aren't in terms of factors that constitutionally you can't consider: gender, race, etc. But there are things you can consider. And the short answer is, in big cases, DOJ does this too. Certainly does the jury consultants. I think in Rodney King, which I worked on, they did it then. Mock trials, I'm not familiar with their having done it. There's no reason not to, except I think if it kind of got out, it would look a little funky somehow. But jury consultants, yes, and of course it matters. And possibly, if I had to guess, I would say, but no actual mock trial.
All right. Super interesting. Back to January 6th. Why haven't the feds gone after members of Congress that participated in the insurrection? Do you think they'll be indicted at the same time as Trump? And if they're indicted, what would their standing be in the House and Senate?
Is somebody who posed it on, because I'm not sure I understand the last part, and I want to, but I think what that maybe means is, if you're indicted, does that mean you lose
Yes.
your office? And the short answer is no. This has come up some because there's in that 14th Amendment, if you actually are found to have participated in an insurrection, not arguably, the Constitution says you can't serve going forward, but it's really murky how that is enforced. But otherwise, and that because of the way it's stated, is a qualification. Just like you got to be over 25, you have to spend but the court has said you can't increase the qualifications. Adam Clayton Powell case in the late 60s. I think he'd been convicted. He'd either been convicted of stuff or was really acting flamboyantly. Congress tried to expel him, and they said, no, the Constitution states the qualifications. You can't add to it. So anyway, if they're indicted, that doesn't mean they're out. And this is coming up with Castro now too. It's very hard for a convict to you can be expelled by a 2/3 vote, and it's ungainly for one's. It's just such a huge political black eye. Okay, will they go after them?
Yeah,
they ought to. Yeah, so we have 138 members of the Republican caucus who are election deniers and who voted not to certify. Nothing wrong with that as a matter of criminal law. I mean, something grievously wrong with that as a matter of policy, and it really, I think, is a deep part of what ails us as a country. But those guys, no crimes. But there are 5 at least: Gosar, Brooks, Green, Perry, maybe more than anybody, who are really involved. So they could have, the obvious way, they were contemptuous. They refused to answer any questions from the January 6th committee. That, I think, is water over the dam, and nothing will happen. But some of them seem to have participated in the actual substantive conduct. The best example of this is Scott Perry. People on the call probably remember the whole Jeff Clark episode at the DOJ, where this mid-level acting assistant attorney general all of a sudden has a very close connection with Trump, who wants to make him attorney general because he's going to do the minor little service of writing Georgia and telling them the DOJ thinks there's fraud, which is a little inconvenient because it's false and just mind-bogglingly stupid, but also criminal. It's part of a fraud scheme. Scott Perry is the guy who makes the marriage from Clark to, he basically walks him into the Oval Office, and he is thick as thieves with him in the actual DOJ scheme. That guy's a co-conspirator. So will the DOJ reach them? Unlike the committee, DOJ has no problem. In fact, I think they kind of, some people kind of live for it to indict members of Congress. But in the whole and oh, by the way, when would it be? I think no sooner than Trump, and probably later. But this is such a huge, momentous investigation. If they indict Trump, it will be the biggest decision in the history of the Department of Justice. And you can really see Merrick Garland or whoever it is saying, enough. We are not going to totally clean up Dodge here. We're not going to ransack Congress, etc. If they do Trump, they could well leave it there. So everything about, especially the January 6th stuff, and as contrasted with Mar-a-Lago, is really sui generis and just has this overlay of political issues, but in a large political sense of the well-being of the country. Garland took office already. He wasn't going to revisit the Mueller stuff. This is, it's the kind of thing that we have no precedent for, except the Nixon case where Ford pardoned him. And I think a lot of people, in retrospect, even though there was, moves to impeach Ford at the time, think it was probably smart. Those considerations will figure in. So that short answer, another long-winded answer, is at least a handful of them ought to be called before the grand jury, considered. Oh, by the way, the crimes in Georgia are also federal crimes, and if those come up, Lindsey Graham, he's probably a co-conspirator too, but probably they get a pass, as will happen to so many people in that department. Will be very satisfied if it strikes a couple very big blows and doesn't spend what also would be, by the way, the next 5 years doing a total mop up operation of everybody.
Yeah. I actually have a quick I have a quick follow up to that. Just as you were saying that it wouldn't be before Trump, it would likely be after Trump. Is there any scenario in which they get Trump on Mar-a-Lago, but not January 6th, and then go after them? Or do you think Trump is a precursor to going after any of the...
I think there's a very big scenario where that happens. And it goes to what I was just talking about. There's a lot of, blood in the water and sort of lust to see Trump punished as and held accountable. And yet there is also both the whole political considerations, but bigger than that, the kind of what I was sort of saying, welfare society. And the Mar-a-Lago case, it's very clear, is way more developed and way more precedented. We've got anyone who's ever done anything close to what Trump has done, it's been indicted and convicted. And it really looked like they were moving quickly in that direction. I know a lot of people who are very consternated. It's sort of just like the bad luck, like a lunar eclipse of the Biden stuff, because maybe it makes it harder to indict Trump. But I think, leaving that wild card to the side for now, though I'm happy to discuss it, way more likely for Mar-a-Lago and sooner. And now, so let's say they do it and they convict him. He's been convicted of a serious felony. They'll figure out how to charge it, whether some kind of sentencing includes just the thing that we really need, which is removing him from the body politic, like the wart that that's even too benign for him. I think things will feel different then. This is not me as a lawyer, not me as an expert, but just like, he's had a felony conviction, a serious sentence. Maybe they've negotiated a thing where he says he isn't going to run. He's already, it seems to me, in the last couple months become, this guy who's running for president, and he doesn't, you really don't hear from him. His big announcement was he was doing Action Heroes, right? So, so I think if he's convicted of serious felonies in Mar-a-Lago, and they are serious, yeah, there'll definitely be 10, 15% who'll never be happy until he's in an orange jumpsuit and his hair is exposed. But I think it'll feel different to us as a country. Not to mention the whole timing of it, because now will be abutting the 24 election. So I think the odds of Mar-a-Lago, again, we got this wild card that's coming up now with the new Biden scandal, but I think our stronger case, more developed case, a case that's ready to go almost, and that Jack Smith will recommend. And so it's, for all those reasons, more likely to come sooner than January 6th. And then in addition, including, it's the worst thing that a president has ever done to this country. But that, in that sense, it's both unprecedented and it's not, he should have been impeached and removed from office. It was a deep political wound that he perpetrated on the country. And that makes it, for a number of reasons, more tricky, ungainly as a prosecution. So it seems to me that not only is it the case, to answer your question, Olivia, that it'll be quicker and would come first, but also the landscape will change, including how much do we go after January 6th and Scott Perry, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. All right. Just a couple more questions. One, the George Santos situation is ridiculous, but I've been wondering what voters can do to ensure that the resume of someone running for office is reliable. I'm not even sure that it's against the law to lie to the public like he did. Thanks.
I'm sure that it's not, and yet it ought to be, right? The Supreme Court has said repeatedly that that's why defamation can be a crime, that false, false stuff to the public, it doesn't have First Amendment value. But imagine trying to write that statute and draw the line between constitutionally protected, what he said, embellishment, or embellishment that he was on the volleyball team at Burke when he never attended any college whatsoever, puffery and et cetera. It would be interesting if you could write the statute in a way to try to make certain really flagrant lies, and whatever the standard for flagrant would be, he met it, illegal, but it's not. So he's off the hook on all of that. Okay, but that leaves a lot, because everything, he's just a flagrant brazen liar from top to bottom, and that some of those are potentially criminal or actionable on his part. The election stuff, anything he filed could be a Federal Election Commission problem, and there's stuff involving financial disclosure forms, and I said this from the start. He had portrayed himself as some kind of successful businessman while he was defaulting on his rent and getting unlawful detainer suits against him. Lent his campaign $700,000? I don't think so. And when you look into that, that's the stuff of actual fraud. Now, back to what I was saying about Adam Clayton Powell. He could be convicted of fraud. He could be, I think, sent to the pokey. It wouldn't get him out of Congress per se. On the other hand, the drumbeats have already started, including, I think, a dozen Republican members to get rid of him. And it's going to become I think that's what's going to happen. It'll be more and more untenable, and he'll have to go. A very big little side story here that people have not, we should do this on YouTube, I think. Have you guys been listening at all to the YouTube channel? We're trying to do a lot more. The Times reports over the weekend, and somehow it gets obscured and other stuff. His campaign commissioned one of these, studies for vulnerability, and it came back he lies like a rug about all these things. It caused several campaign staffers to quit, and it's 100% clear, it's a fact, that the head of the biggest PAC in the Republican Party was aware of this, and he is, it's also a fact, very close with, anyone want to fill in the blank here? Kevin McCarthy. So it seems to me really likely that McCarthy knew it, and what a jerk, if that right. So cynical and so ruthless that he knows he's got a complete pathological liar, and he smushes it over to get one more vote for speaker. And if that comes out, that's, again, doesn't not a crime against McCarthy, but really to me feels like kind of scandalous. Anyway, so most everything he said, not actionable. On the other hand, part of the drumbeat of this guy's a flaming liar. And I think it's gonna reach a point, especially if there's any concrete thing he's charged with, and everything just gets worse and worse and worse for him, including, just the last couple of days, the Russian oligarch, etc. And I think he's going to be forced out. Even though he could just close himself in the office and say, come and get me and order in a lot of pizza for 2 years. But I think it will become, the party will say, you got to go because you're such a distraction. And ought to happen in 6 months or so.
Yeah. Wow. All righty. Last question. And it's the big one. There are many investigations into Trump happening. What do you think will be the first to indict and when?
First to indict, I think, will be Fulton County. I don't think it'll be the first to convict. I'm not sure that it will convict. And when we would have said, so something big is coming up next week in Fulton County. Recall that the DA there, Fonnie Willis, gave it to a special grand jury, in part because they were getting such trouble from Republicans around the country. They don't have the power to indict, but they do have the power to do a report. They've done a report, and on the 24th, there's going to be a motion in Fulton County Court to make that report public. If it's made public, it seems to me, Fonnie Willis is going to move quickly. Once you have that out, you don't want, it steals your thunder to not sort of come forward. Now, what does that mean, move quickly? She has to convene, and possibly she's already done it, another grand jury, a grand jury that has the power to issue indictments. She will bring in, over a course of a few sessions, you can do this with hearsay, so she'll bring in an agent to go through everything, including maybe the report itself that the special grand jury did, and she will look to do charges. The operating assumption had been that she would do it as soon as the 24th, but a couple real asterisks here. One, the motion on the 24th, it's a matter of Georgia law. The law is it must be released unless it qualifies as a presentment, the kind of thing a grand jury does. I think it doesn't qualify as a presentment. It's just a report, but it's a quirk of Georgia law, and we'll see what happens. But then second, and more importantly, in the tea leaf reading, especially from some of my colleagues who are really close to this, she wants to shore up a few things before she actually does charges. But, the 24th, especially if the report comes out, everything changes. She can't wait too long. So the first to indict, here you go, Fulton County by Valentine's Day or so. It will immediately then pose all these pretty heavy-duty issues about federal versus state power, and can any DA indict a former president, etc. Can you remove it to federal court? We're getting really arcane here. But basically, I think Trump will be able to tie it up for a long time, and there'll be trouble. I don't know if they'll ever get over the finish line. To me, the first case that's likely to get over the finish line is the Mar-a-Lago Jack Smith case, which I think will follow in a couple months, would be my best guess. There you have it. I'm bolder with my predictions in these sessions, but what's the worst that happened? You come back next month and you said
exactly.
But a real pleasure to talk to you guys about this stuff. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you everyone for joining. And please stay tuned for next month. We'll have another one of these Q&As.
All righty. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good evening.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you later, as they say. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.